So there's been an endless amount of political content out there because of the election these days. You've had like 1,000 town halls. They're happening like every other night on CNN. Then you had the South Carolina debate. It wasn't even that long ago that we had the Nevada debate. It's just they're hitting you over and over and over and over. Even me, and I'm a political junkie, even I'm like, okay, I tap out. No more. Well, last night, Elizabeth Warren had a town hall with CNN. And she was asked a very good question by a Bernie supporter. And her answer here is disheartening to say the least. But it's even beyond disheartening, and it's dishonest. So let's see what she had to say, and then I'll respond.
Hi, Jason.
Hey now, Senator Warren. Welcome to Charleston.
Thank you.
During the Nevada debate, you and every other candidate on the stage, except for Bernie, hello somebody, indicated that the candidate with the plurality of delegates should not necessarily be the nominee. This essentially means the will of the voters could be denied by the superdelegates and the DNC, which is basically undemocratic. And in my opinion, is a bunch of baba booey, to put it politely. Can you explain why the will of the voters should not matter if no candidate reaches a majority of delegates?
So you do know that was Bernie's position in 2016?
Not necessarily, no.
Yeah.
He won 22 states, so he went to the convention.
That was Bernie's position in 2016, that it should not go to the person who had a plurality.
Okay.
So, and remember, his last play was to superdelegates. So the way I see this is you write the rules before you know where everybody stands, and then you stick with those rules. So for me, Bernie had a big hand in writing these rules. I didn't write them, but Bernie did when they were putting together the 2016 platform for the Democratic Convention. Those are the rules that he wanted to write and others wanted to write. Everybody got in the race thinking that was the set of rules. I don't see how come you get to change it just because he now thinks there's an advantage to him for doing it.
I got to follow that, but I got the Howard reference at Hey Now, by the way, Jason. So listen, Senator Warren, to be clear, would you continue your fight for the Democratic nomination even if another candidate arrived at the convention ahead of you in the delegate count?
Yes.
So that is really upsetting. Her position is bad enough, and we'll talk about that in a second, but she's just flat out not telling the truth about Bernie's position. So Bernie's position was to totally eliminate superdelegates, and he was forced to compromise and leave them on the second ballot. Okay? So they made adjustments. It used to be the case that they were on the first ballot. The left position was just eliminate them. They're undemocratic. That was Bernie's position. That was the entire left-wing movement's position. And the corporatists were like, no, but we'll meet you halfway and we'll push off superdelegates to the second ballot. So she's lying about his position. Now, beyond that, she says, oh, well, in 2016, he wanted to override the will of the people and he didn't want the plurality to determine the winner. That's also not true. So back then, and you guys will probably remember this if you were following politics closely back then, they used to count superdelegates up front. And even on like CNN, when the results would roll in on MSNBC, they would count the superdelegates before any of the votes were cast. So oftentimes you would see like the race hadn't happened yet and Hillary Clinton, for argument's sake, had like 10 delegates already on her side and Bernie had 0. And the argument I was making and many people were making at the time is like, well, hold on now. That's ridiculous. That's unfair. And there were multiple contests where Bernie crushed in the popular vote and beat Hillary. But since Hillary had superdelegates, she actually won the state. Stop and think about that. Massively undemocratic. Incredibly undemocratic. So for Bernie to say, okay, that's not okay. I've won a bunch of states and you've taken away my victory in an undemocratic fashion, so I would like to not have that happen. That's very different than how Elizabeth Warren is portraying Bernie Sanders' position here. And then on top of that, guys, Bernie hung around until the convention one of the most important reasons, and you go back and watch my show, watch TYT, everybody talked about this at the time. One of the main reasons he was hanging around until the end was not only to correct the record and get like the accurate count, because again, it was biased against him. He would win states and then lose in the delegate count. He wanted the proper delegates to be reflected, but also because Hillary was under FBI investigation. And if she were to get indicted and face federal charges, what would or should the DNC do? What would be the proper course of action in that situation? What would be the proper course of action if the Democratic nominee, presumptive Democratic nominee, is indicted on federal crimes and, you know, theoretically could face prison time? What do you do? Well, you know, it'd be nice to have another plan, another option in case something like that happened, which was a very real possibility. Now, it turned out, you know, you guys all remember how that unfolded. There was, who was it? Was it Comey who came out and gave this tortured logic speech where he was like, even though she kind of broke the law, there's nothing we could do about it for reasons X, Y, and Z. And so that didn't end up happening. But he should stay until the convention just for that alone. For that alone, it makes sense to stay in until the end. So she's really just flat out misstating what his position is here. And then also, I haven't brought up the obvious point, which is you guys are probably screaming at me in your heads over this. We learned from WikiLeaks, now it doesn't matter whether you dislike WikiLeaks, irrelevant, but we learned from their leaks that they were rigging the primary against Bernie. That's not conjecture. That's a fact. The DNC was taking orders from the Clinton campaign. The Clinton campaign got last word on press releases from the DNC. They were like this. There was no distinction between the DNC and the Clinton campaign. They were one and the same. They were rigging the primary. We learned so much. We learned about, Donna Brazile giving Hillary Clinton the debate questions beforehand. It was a very, very dirty process. So one could argue at face value alone, he wasn't given a fair chance up front. There wasn't an actual democratic vote that happened. So the argument is, oh, hold on, accept the fact that I rigged it with superdelegates, accept the fact that the Clinton campaign and the DNC were one and the same and they were rigging it against Bernie. And then if Bernie tries to say, I'm going to the convention to try to correct some of the wrongs here, somehow he's being undemocratic? No. You're simply misstating his position. Now, the final point is, guys, Warren is delusional if she thinks that the establishment would pick her at a brokered convention as a compromise candidate, because that's the argument that she's presenting publicly. She's saying, hey, look, I'm going to stay in because if it gets to the convention and nobody has a majority, I will try to become the nominee behind the scenes, basically, is what she's saying. And she thinks like, oh, I've made enough inroads with the establishment where they'll accept me as the middle point between somebody like Biden and somebody like Bernie. And my message for her is, you're kidding yourself. They don't like you. And effectively, you sold out for nothing, Warren, because I got news for you. They didn't forget about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They didn't forget about the fact that you want to raise taxes on Wall Street and you want to regulate Wall Street. These people who would be making this decision are massively corrupt and bought by the special interests. They're not going to pick somebody who threatens them even 1%. Now, there are many issues where Elizabeth Warren is very establishment. And really, on paper, she is the middle point between somebody like Biden and somebody like Bernie. But that's irrelevant. They don't like you. And that's not going to happen. And by the way, if you were, let's say hypothetically, let's give her everything she's saying here. Okay, boom. Contested convention, they give you the nomination, you get to the general election. You want to talk about destroying whatever remnants of a legacy you have left? You would go down in history as somebody who lost to Donald Trump in a landslide. That's what would happen. Any contested convention hands the election to Trump. Full stop. It doesn't matter what the outcome is. Any contested convention hands the election to Trump. Full stop. Whoever wins a plurality should win. If you get a plurality or a majority, either one of those things, you got the most votes, you should win. I think that's very simple. And somebody tweeted at me last night and said, okay, I don't agree with you about what Bernie's position was, But let's assume that what you're saying is true. Okay, then why shouldn't Elizabeth Warren stay in the race? Because what if, let's say hypothetically, knock on wood, Bernie Sanders passes away? Wouldn't you want Warren in the race then, so she hangs around until the convention, and then she could be picked in a situation like that? And my response to that person was very simple. No. It should be whoever got the second most votes in that scenario. That's what it should be. Why? Because that's what makes the most sense. That is the most democratic position, even if it's a plurality, even if it's a tiny plurality. That person got the most votes of the remaining candidates. And lest you think, a hypocrite about this or whatever, no, I actually said multiple times on my show back in 2016 that the only occasion where I would be okay with, and this was before we knew about the rigging, to be fair, okay, but I said only if Hillary's indicted and it looks like she might literally face, like, prison time and then she tanks in the polls, like, 15 points. Only in a situation like that would I be okay with Bernie becoming the nominee. And I said, listen, if you got fewer votes, you got fewer votes. And as a matter of principle, I'm not going to support you being the nominee in that situation. I will argue against you, even if you're my preferred candidate. I think as a matter of principle, if you get more votes, you deserve to be the candidate. Full stop. Full stop. Again, this was before we knew about the rigging. That adds a whole nother complicated factor. But that was my position back then. And so I'm consistent on it. That's my position now, too. If it's a plurality or if it's a majority, you got more votes, you should be the nominee. But they're trying to, like, hypocrisy burn Bernie by saying, oh, your position was the opposite in 2016, but it really wasn't. It really wasn't. He has always had the position to eliminate superdelegates. And he impacted these rules. His position was, let's eliminate them, and then they ended up going with the middle path with the corporatists, and the middle path being only have the superdelegates on the second ballot. So really, they're completely misstating Bernie's position here. She is, and that's really disappointing.